Episode 74, Mastering Space Logistics with Jonathan Firth.
In the industry, there's definitely competition, make no mistake about it. There is collaboration as well. Often things are achieved by teams working together.
Welcome, fellow STEM enthusiasts, to the STEM Southwest podcast, your source for all things science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This podcast is designed to create STEM connections, cohesion, and elevation. This is a place where STEM enthusiasts gather to learn about some amazing STEM rock stars and activities of the Southwest and beyond that are impacting the world. If you have longed to be united with your fellow STEM nerds, then you've found your people here at STEM Southwest. And now, here are your hosts, Bob and Shelley.
Hey everyone, this is Bob.
And I'm Shelley.
Together we are STEM Southwest.
So Bob, today's guest is a repeat offender, lucky number 13, our friend from across the pond, Jonathan Firth.
Well, that's where he is now. When we first interviewed him, he was right here in New Mexico. So
Yes.
He's traveled a few miles away.
Yes, he has. So he's still near and dear to our heart, still stays very connected to what's happening here in the Southwest. And so I couldn't think of anybody else that I'd want to have a conversation with. And plus his accent is awesome. So let's face it.
Yes, it is.
Anyway, so before we get into the episode, I did want to make a couple shout outs. First of all, shout out to a couple of our listeners who sent us messages after the Zozobra interview with the utility company. This is our past interview. I just want to say, first of all, thank you, because your words just encourage us to continue on our antics here. Sometimes it's like, anybody out there? Anybody listening? Right? We think that. So it's fun when we know someone actually listened. So thank you so much. And speaking of Zozobra, it got burned last night. So our daughter actually did a piece on it for KRQE CBS here. And we're going to put a link to that in our show notes because people might want to get the update on this year's Zozobra.
So for those folks that weren't able to catch that episode, what is Zozobra?
Right. So Zozobra is kind of a physical representation of the agony and suffering and things that we want to rid ourselves of. And it's a New Mexico tradition to once a year, everybody takes and writes down or creates. This year, some groups created COVID-looking cells and stuffed them into Zozobra, and that all got torched and burned to pieces. And of course, our guest, he talks a lot more knowingly about it, but it is kind of an interesting tradition, and it's one meant with a sort of celebratory kind of, let's burn up all these woes and gloom from the past year and start afresh and start anew.
And our guest being Ray Sandoval.
Exactly. So thanks, Ray. I bet you are sleeping in today, but it was fun, and Mackenzie had a great piece. Mackenzie is also our editor of the podcast. And so she has a great piece on Zozobra from the news station, and we'll make sure to include a link.
Okay.
Yeah. So anything else you want to say about Jonathan Firth and our episode with him and, maybe his prior episode?
Well, I think we were talking about this after the episode, or after our interview with him. The company he works for is Orbit. Mm-hmm. And the name kind of is telling that their original mission as a company was to remove space trash.
Right.
Essentially.
Yes. That was their very first idea. I distinctly remember him telling me about that as he was considering returning back to his family and to his homeland.
Right, but their what they do now is much, much larger than just removing space junk. And so you'll hear a lot about that. There is a lot going on. I know we have had several episodes focused on space, that's because there is a lot of space-related things going on.
Let's face it, yeah. Lots of space-related things happening in New Mexico, but also lots of top secret things from the national labs that are here. And so those top secret things, they'd have to kill us if we talked about them. So let's talk about space instead.
And space is just not happening in New Mexico. When Blue Origin was launched with Jeff Bezos, that occurred in West Texas. There are other happenings in California and throughout the country. So
Absolutely.
We certainly will continue to cover space-related items, but there is so much more we want to cover on future podcasts with respect to STEM. There's so much to cover. It's overwhelming. We come into contact with a lot of people involved with STEM on the ground. So you'll be hearing more from these folks in future episodes.
Yeah. And hey, one of our next episodes, you and I are actually headed to Texas. And we're going to record an episode from there. So stay tuned. That's just kind of maybe not as STEM related, but certainly one of our interest area, which is finances.
Well, I will disagree. There's lots of STEM related activities in finance nowadays, and
well, absolutely.
Right.
But it's not strictly, and it certainly relates to the M in STEM, right? Math. With that, we will shoot off into space in our next episode 74.
So Shelley, I'm really excited to have our guest today. He is a returning guest in episode 13. He was here to speak about the Las Cruces Space Festival, a former employee of Virgin Galactic now, and doing some amazing stuff in Europe and around the world. Our guest today is Jonathan Firth.
Hi there, Bob.
Thank you for joining us. Hi.
Hi, Shelley.
Hello from across the world. It's so exciting to have you here. And episode 13, feels like forever ago.
Yes, it was also during a very different time versus what we're going through now.
But I just want to say thanks to Jonathan. He was an early supporter and has been an ongoing supporter of the podcast. And we've had a few meetings. I think you might have started a podcast or two since we've launched ours, right? So it's kind of fun.
we haven't quite got it rolling yet, but we took your good advice, and that's really helped us prepare for it. But we're not quite there yet.
Fantastic. Well, you did leave a legacy though at Spaceport America. I think they're doing a podcast down there these days. And I know that was kind of birthed out of some of the vision that you had for creating this really great program, and maybe we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but I'll let you ask your very first question.
Well, I mean, you can go back to episode 13 and read the show notes, listen to the interview we had with Jonathan. It was a really good interview. We also had an opportunity to visit with him in person a couple times in first Las Cruces and then also at Spaceport.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, Jonathan, what happened? When we last spoke with you, you were working for Virgin Galactic, working with the Las Cruces Space Festival, and then you were working for a company called D-Orbit. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm working for D-Orbit now. I started with them almost 2 years ago. And I left Virgin Galactic in the fall of 2018. And I stuck around in New Mexico because we had the Space Festival coming up in April 2019, which was very successful. And you guys came down to the open day that we had at Spaceport America, and we had literally thousands and thousands of people that came to that. So it was a great event, very memorable. So if I look back on my time, in New Mexico, that was definitely one of the highlights.
Yeah, it was such a great event. And I often talk to people, and especially given all that's been happening at Spaceport America this past year and even the past several months, just how exciting it is to watch that happen and have had the opportunity, thanks to the good work that you and the committee did, to open that space up before there were a lot of big, expensive space-bound equipment setting in that big hangar.
We used to say to people when they were coming around, you might be the last visitors that are allowed in, because it was empty for a good number of years. And then, there was going to be a time, there was always going to be a time when Virgin Galactic moved over from California and brought the equipment. And that's the situation now. So the access is, I believe, I'm not involved anymore, but I believe the access is a lot more restricted than it used to be.
So how did your time here in the Southwest prepare you? And tell us a little bit more about D-Orbit and the work that you're doing there.
Well, it prepared me because, the experience that I got out there was, very, very fulfilling. It gave me, it rounded out that stage of my career, and it sort of made me think, what should I do next? What comes next? And my family are all in Europe, so there was always going to be a time when I headed back to Europe, which is what happened at the spring of 2019. And I met through some of the investors in D-Orbit, I met the team there, and they just had a fantastic vision, and they, had a, sort of young, dynamic team. And I went over to visit them at their HQ in Italy, and I got a really good feeling about the team, and they sort of showed me what their plans were in terms of developing the business, and it looked really like a great opportunity. And they asked me if I wanted to come on board, and I'd been in that situation previously back in 2004, which is going to make me sound very old, but I am very old. And when I was invited to join Virgin Galactic, and there were 5 people, at that stage, and wow. Jonathan, would you like to join the team? And over the years that has certainly developed. And it was a similar, the team is a bit bigger with the D-Orbit. It was about 50 at that point, but certainly big plans, and would you like to get involved? So it was an easy decision to say yes. And I've got some family history in Italy as well, and I've been to Italy a lot over the years. And again, I think probably that resonated with me maybe more than it would have done if it had been, one of the other countries in Europe. So yeah, it's going really well. As I say, I've been there nearly 2 years now, and I've learned a tremendous amount, which is great. You always want to be in that position, but it's also, where I can pass on some of my experience or some of the things that I've learned over the years to some of the younger guys in the team as well. The average age of the company is 31. So, there's plenty of people who are in their first job or their second job. And, you don't want to come across as the sort of been there, seen it, done it all, this is the way to do it. But, you can save people sort of heading into, situations that they might get into otherwise, just by a bit of gentle steering or a bit of just asking them, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that kind of, conversation? So, yeah, it's working both ways, really interesting. Started to start picking up some Italian language as well. And then, the pandemic hit, and, that changed it, like it did for so many other people. So we've been working remotely for about, 16 months now, everybody in the company pretty much.
So what is the particular focus of D-Orbit, and what is your role in the company?
Yeah. So what business are we in? We're in space logistics and transportation. So an easy sort of comparison is, if you think FedEx or UPS on Earth, then we're the space version of that. Much smaller at the moment, but that's what we want to do. So we do things like the main rockets. A SpaceX of this world will take a bunch of small satellites up to a delivery orbit, and then we have a spacecraft that delivers them into their particular orbits that they want to go to, just like a FedEx truck, really. We call that Iron, the vehicle. And what it also can do then, once it's dropped off its packages, which are, Earth observation satellites or Internet of Things satellites, data gathering satellites, it has a second life, because on board, there's a computer processing power and communication devices. So we can do space-to-space business, taking data from other, from customers, potential customers, and processing that for them and shooting it back over to where they need to act on it, or selecting the parts that they want to bring back down to earth. So not everything that they've gathered comes back down, only the refined part of it. So we're developing that. We've done 3 missions to space in the last 10 months, so we don't have all of that capability proven, but we have a lot of it that is being demonstrated, and with each mission we're adding new features, and the market is seeing us gradually proving these things, and there's a lot more interest now, and our vehicles are fully booked for the coming flights, which is really good.
That is fantastic. It's a great way to grow a business, but it's, and if people are thinking like, what's the connection here to the Southwest? Obviously, Jonathan, you were in the Southwest, but I imagine once we're in space, it is space, it is vast, it is no particular group owns a certain portion of it or can lay claim to it. So you're serving companies probably, I imagine, from all over the world with this service. Yeah.
Yeah. The companies and governments and institutions. So the mission that we've got at the moment is serving users from about 12 different countries around the world. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same with the next mission that we've got planned for December as well. So my role, you're asking, Bob, is Chief Operating Officer, which means really that I look after the internal operations of the company day to day.
Fantastic. And probably offering, earlier talking about basically what I would call mentoring, right? As you're helping this young company grow. I don't know that would you consider D-Orbit? Was it a startup when you joined on, do you think, or it was beyond that point and it had investors and supporters, or?
Yeah, it did. So I think of it more as it's scaling up at this stage. It's existed for 10 years. So it's been through the seeding investor stage and the A round, and it's gone beyond that. It's very efficient in the way I really admired when I went to meet them. They've achieved so much, having not raised much money. And certainly when you compare that with the kind of money that's often raised in the US by a company that has an idea but hasn't actually put it into service, or doesn't actually have customers, or doesn't have revenue yet. Right. The progress was really, really impressive. So, I might be passing on some of my advice, but I'm learning a lot from them as well. And, I'm happy to have been invited in, to go on the journey with them.
Absolutely. So that's exciting. So what kind of, it sounds like D-Orbit is doing really kind of a specialized, as we've now grown into outer space. Now there's organizations, we've interviewed someone before where they're offering the internet into outer space, right? Like, so there's services that we're looking at. We've talked about trash in outer space and how that's being addressed, and there's companies dealing with that. What are some of the trends that you're seeing, even through the impact of people working from home and all of the changes under the pandemic? But what are some of the trends in the industry, Jonathan?
One of the trends certainly is the number of satellites that are being launched. So if you go back between Sputnik and, just a few years ago, there'd been, the number of satellites launched in history was less than 10,000. And the projections for the next 10 years are something like 40 or 50,000 satellites. So certainly the increase in the coming years is a big trend. And what people are, launching, and, SpaceX would be an example of this, but there are many other companies. Planet is another company based in the US, in the Bay Area. They're putting up constellations of satellites that work together. And, they're taking advantage of the cheaper manufacturing methods, limited life, the fast turnover of technology evolving. So they're not designing satellites that will last for 20 years. They're designing ones that will last for maybe 3 years or 5 years. And so what they need to do is get them into operation really quickly, so that the limited operating life, is maximized, which is where, the service that we offer comes in, because we can take them from the launch point, and then within a couple of weeks, we can deploy them around the Earth in the precise locations they want to be, instead of them just drifting over the sort of 9-month period to the right locations, which was the traditional way of doing it. So definitely the growth of constellations. There's a lot of investment in new space companies, a tremendous amount that, it's just been increasing year by year. And this year particularly, there have been quite a lot of new space companies announcing that they're going to go public, and sort of as a part of that process, raising quite a lot of money. So I think what you're also going to see, which is what happens in all industries at some stage, is some consolidation. There are many small space companies, and I think you're going to see some grouping of those to some extent, just because there's money available to do that. Some of these companies want to grow. It's going to take too long maybe to grow organically. So that, if they can take steps by combining their efforts with an existing team or with existing capabilities, they're going to do that. Launch costs have come down. So, the price per pound or the price per kilo for putting payload into space has come down a lot. And this is because of reusability. So an example would be SpaceX with the Falcon 9, which is launching really often now and offering not only, to carry big satellites, but also rideshare missions where lots of customers can fly on the same mission, and the costs have come down. And so that, again, makes it more possible for organizations to fly who wouldn't have been able to afford to, not so many years ago. And then I think another one is new services. Lots of other industries are enabled, or their progress is amplified by activity in the space arena, and that's only going to increase. So the use of data that's gathered, Earth observation in real time, wider, Internet of Things, networks, those sorts of things. So those are some of the trends.
So, Jonathan, one thing you said actually jumped out at me. You talked about some satellites having 20-year lives, or a 20-year life. What happens after? I mean, is the industry looking at that as far as all these satellites that become ineffectual after a certain time period? Are they retrieving those back from orbit, or what's the mindset?
Yeah, I think there's, they're going to sort of look at the situation with these vehicles, and they're not all, it's not a one size fits all solution. With some of them, they're absolutely still usable. They're just going to run out of fuel or run out of battery life at some point. And so if they can be serviced in space, and if their life can be extended, they're going to carry on doing work. So what's coming, a trend that is starting, to materialize, and certainly from the company that I work for, we're really interested in the opportunities, is in-orbit servicing. So this can be things like life extension by providing power, or sometimes it's going to be repurposing, because these materials are in space now, and it's going to be possible to put new software into them from the ground, and give them a new purpose, a new life at some point. Repositioning them potentially, the kind of vehicle that we have and other companies are developing can do that kind of thing. And debris removal and active debris removal is more and more something that people are turning their minds to. And actually, when Deorbit was founded, that was their original idea, that was their vision. And the first product that they developed was a deorbiting device that could either be put in a new satellite being launched, or could be attached in space to an existing satellite in order to bring it out of orbit at the end of its life. So absolutely, people are thinking about debris. They're thinking about it from a congestion point of view, and a threat to satellites operating properly in space for the time that they're intended to operate. They're thinking about it from the regulatory point of view. They're thinking about it from the commercial risk point of view as well. And there was a mission the other day, actually a Japanese company, Astroscale, demonstrated a magnetic device that attached to a piece of space debris. They've got some other stages of demonstration to go on the current mission, but there's an organization that are thinking about whether they can turn that into a business, and they're doing a sort of proof of concept flight at the moment. On our mission that we're doing at the moment, at the end of it, we've got a drag sail on board, which we're going to demonstrate. It's a first use of it, so we're hoping that it's going to work, and if it does, then that will deorbit our vehicle, and it'll fall out of its orbit and enter the atmosphere and burn up. So yeah, definitely people are thinking about this from all points of view, and it's coming.
Right. It sounds like that's really, it's also related to the environmental impact, right? Like, I imagine there must be some research being done on even the environmental impact of all these things burning up as they enter the atmosphere, right? Is there some impact there?
People are also looking at the environmental impact from things going up as well. The fuels that are burnt, the emissions from that. Trying to refine that all the time, looking at the fuels, like the aviation industry for quite a number of years have been looking at different fuel types to try and work out what's the most sustainable way of doing these things. But our organization doesn't claim a monopoly on this, but we are an organization that was founded with the vision of how do we make our use of space sustainable. And so it's sort of baked into our DNA. As we go along, we think about the impact of what we're doing and the societal benefit, as well as, what's the financial return going to be.
Well, you mentioned earlier how one of the trends that you think that we'll see is the smaller organization banding together and becoming maybe larger organizations so they can impact and their growth could impact the industry. Is there a lot of crossover in your industry when it comes to like the global marketplace? Do you see, and is there cooperation? Is it like a feeling of competition? What's that like, and how does that impact your work?
It may not be two small companies banding together. It might be big companies, saying, we want to have you as part of our organization. And we've certainly seen that in other industries as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think, in the industry, there's definitely competition, make no mistake about it. Like lots of other industries, there's competition, but there is collaboration as well. And, we see that in the way that our customers want to work with us. So, they often are putting things into space for the first time, or either from another service we offer is to host technology developing on our spacecraft for in-orbit demonstration and validation. And so they want to work with us collaboratively, so it helps them advance in what they're doing. And then other organizations, when there are opportunities from space agencies or other institutions, they often do it in such a way that they foster, collaboration between companies that are developing in industry as well. And some of the bidding that we've done over the last 18 months, particularly, that's been a feature where one or other of us will be the lead, and then other companies, fall in and support some element of what the space agency, for example, in Europe or one of the European countries is trying to develop. And they do it in such a way that almost, not many companies can do it by themselves. They really, are trying to catalyze, the ecosystem so that it does work together. And we've been successful either as the prime or as, a secondary on a number of contracts where that's not only, going to happen through the bidding period, but it's now into the implementation stage as well, where we're going to be working together.
So we've asked this for a few of our guests in the past, and it may be a simple answer, but when we last spoke with you, you had been at Virgin Galactic and the Las Cruces Space Festival, and it was pre-pandemic. And so March of 20 is when it really started, the pandemic. Has this impacted how you all have been working together? I know you've had to do a lot of Zoom meetings and all that stuff, but has it affected the mission of your company or your competitors that you've seen?
Yeah. So one of the first effects that we felt, we were due to fly in March 2020 from French Guiana on Arianespace Vega flight. And because of coronavirus, the launch site was evacuated and the mission didn't actually take place until September 2020. So ourselves, in terms of, and that was our first mission with this satellite carrier vehicle, and our customers and the other customers that were flying as well were all delayed by quite a number of months. So there was an effect straight away. Another impact would be in our supply chain, for example. That's certainly been impacted. It's not been as easy to move things. Some suppliers have been affected because their workforce haven't been able to come into work, and so their production hasn't hit the levels they expected. And so, the companies that they've contracted with, they can't fulfill in some cases the commitments that they've made. So there's that kind of thing. It's just, it's been harder, to work in the way that we did traditionally. So, for example, trade shows that we, usually a good way of communicating the benefits of the services and products that you're developing to potential customers weren't taking place. And so you were relying on, like we all were, calls like this one or phone calls. So that changed that. So it's changed. The impact has been felt, in very many ways. We sort of were at the stage of our development where we said, look, we're not going to reduce our numbers, which quite a number of companies were at that stage. They were furloughing people or even cutting back staff numbers. And we just said, no, we're not going to increase the size of our team, but we're certainly going to stick with, the team that we've got. We were able, fortunately, to have our manufacturing people go in every day because it was classed as part of aerospace and part of an essential industry. But everybody who didn't need to be there has been working remotely, over the months, more than a year now. And it's definitely been, it's been a major experiment across the world, hasn't it, really, in a different way of working, and people who weren't convinced that it would work. And I remember a few years ago, when I was involved in companies in the States, people saying, oh, well, if I can't see them working, I don't know whether they are working or not. They need to come to the facility. And I think, a lot of people have had the chance to think again and see that that isn't necessarily, true and isn't necessarily necessary going forwards. And I think, people do want to collaborate. They do want to see each other. They do want to sit down and, look at drawings or have a cup of coffee and talk about things. But I think this hybrid of, that kind of time, but also time away from that, particularly people who are in technology, focused jobs, they need some quiet time to think things through. And open plan offices, which were, kind of a feature, aren't necessarily the best way of doing that. And people have found that they, working remotely has helped them, concentrate. But equally, because of the worry of the pandemic, because of, family situations or whatever it may be, remote working hasn't been good for people's mental health in other ways. So having some, as we go forward, finding the best way of, combining these, is definitely going to be part of how we return to work fully.
Some sort of balance there for sure. Okay, so I have to, I want to just talk a little bit. I think you called the satellite carrier vehicle ION. Is that what you called it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
ION.
tell us a little bit about the process and what that looks like. And I'm curious, like, as it's moving things and unloading things, like, is it equipped with robots? Like, how does that stuff even happen, Jonathan? I'm nerding out a little bit over here over that.
Well, I can show you a picture if can I do that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Right. So it's kind of a big square box. You can imagine it sits on the top of a table. So I can't remember the exact dimensions, but if you think sort of 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, you're not going to be far away. You know, it could be a bit bigger than that. And part of it is a selection of sort of tubes, if you like, where satellites are placed inside, ready to be deployed, you know, in space. And this vehicle sits on them in the top of the rocket that it's flying on. So on our most recent couple of missions, it's been on a Falcon 9, along with other cargo that it's carrying. Mm-hmm. And it's released in the delivery orbit. So about an hour after the mission takes off, and the last couple of launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida, our vehicle is released into space and it's flying independently then. And so from our ground, we have a mission control in our facility in Italy. We make contact with the vehicle and we take control of it. And we've had a bit of adventure with that. And so that would be a good example of collaboration, because the mission that we flew in January, there was such a cluster of satellites released that it was very difficult to pick out which one was ours and make contact with it. And the type of radio that we were using had quite a narrow field. The S-band radio had quite a narrow field. So finding which one was ours was really difficult. And SpaceX sort of give you coordinates of this is where we let it go, and you have to kind of pick it up from there. But we actually got a lot of help from some organizations within the space community who helped us by allowing us to use some of their equipment and some of their network of ground stations, and we were able after a while to pick it up. And then we started the period of commissioning. So once we've made contact with it, then we have the ability to control its movements. We can update software if we need to, and then we can control the deployment of the cargo that's inside it. So the commissioning period is typically 2 weeks. And then it goes on its journey, dropping off, the satellites one by one. And once it's finished, it takes its place in what we plan to grow as an increasing family, a constellation of our own satellites, which have the capability of hosting technology demonstration or validation payloads, but also by carrying computer processing equipment and communication equipment, become part of this service of on-orbit servicing is what we're aiming for. So does that kind of answer your question? Because if it does, I can sort of move on to the next stage, which sort of shows you how that's going to develop.
Yeah, well, I guess one other question I had related to that, you said that you can use ION to move satellites throughout space and reposition them. Is that part of this process, or is that a future process?
So that's in the future, and it's on the roadmap. So what this vehicle can do at the moment is it can fly in the orbit in which it's been delivered, and then it can lower its orbit or raise its orbit or change the plane of its orbit, which are all things that can suit the particular needs of customers, because they don't all want their satellites putting in that delivery orbit. That, for one reason or another, they might want a different orbit. For example, if you are able to lower the orbit and then release Earth observation satellites, they can get a clearer picture because they're that bit closer to the Earth.
Sure.
And also the latency, the time it takes to go up and down. If your messaging up and down to your satellite is a bit less than it would be at a higher orbit. So that's what's possible now. And then what we can do, for example, by adding a robotic arm to this vehicle, is if we can give it the capability to move towards this in-orbit servicing that I was talking about earlier, where it can get a hold of something that's already in space and, add something, for example, to it, another battery pack to extend its life, or take it physically and put it somewhere else, maybe for a new duty, or maybe because the customer who put it in one place want it somewhere else and it doesn't have its own propulsion, so they need something to move it.
Right. Interesting. That is really fascinating, and it makes me think. Jonathan, I think we met through the robotics competition, and to me that like just validates what we're doing in that sense of a robotic arm on a robot that kids are building. There are applications to robotic arms that are out in space making.
There definitely are, yeah. And it's not just robotics that's already proven in space. Robotics that's used in other harsh environments, for example, in the nuclear industry, is equally challenging. And once it's proven in one industry, it's possible that it can be used in another. So once we have these satellites up there, then the next stage is it's delivered its satellites and it goes into the next stage of its activity, which is carrying out the hosted payloads, carrying out in-orbit testing. So people, who are developing their hardware up the technology readiness level, they want to get it in space. For example, there are a lot of young companies who need to prove, because they're still raising money, that their technology works. They don't want to release it as an independent satellite in space, but they do want to show that it works in the space environment, and that can be done by being a passenger on this vehicle. And then we have cameras on the vehicle, so we can take pictures of things, we can find things in space. So that gives us the opportunity to look for things, whether it's debris or whatever it may be, and have situational awareness capabilities. And then by carrying a data center, we've got the possibility of edge computing. So the computing's done in space with data that's gathered in space, and then you can take action in space, or without any of that coming back down to the ground, for human intervention. Because if you have machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities on your spacecraft, it can look for the right information, and you've told it, when you see this information, this is what it should do, and the action is much quicker. And then, because we have the data relay network capability being added to it, we can link between ourselves and customer satellites, between our own satellites, but also with customers. And then, so that's all possible today. And then coming in the future is in-orbit servicing, so repositioning, life extension, and active debris removal is coming, which is going and looking for things and taking them out of orbit. And then ultimately, manufacturing in space will be happening on a larger scale. It's already possible. They have a 3D printer on the space station right now, but it's going to happen on a much larger scale, particularly if they can start using some of the materials that are available in space. And recycling, just taking these components and reprogramming them and putting new software in them and using them for, some new use that they haven't been used for before. So that's kind of the roadmap that we're thinking about, from what we're doing now to where it potentially can go in the future.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. That really is intriguing. It's really interesting to think about it. We've certainly done a lot of interviews with a lot of different organizations that are, whether they're launching satellites or whatever, but obviously this is such important work. And I'm curious, what do you think what's one thing, and this can be a really hard question, Jonathan, what's one skill that you think young people should really pursue if they want to join this kind of new space race and get involved in organizations like Deorbit and others around the world that are using innovation and applying it? What do you think?
Well, I think what people call the soft skills are, interesting ones to think about. So they're not necessarily the ones you think about necessarily, but problem solving, for example, So, and I'm sure the people who are involved in the robotics club come up with this all the time,
Right.
putting things together. Did it work? No, it didn't. What can we do, differently? How can we make it work? Just, having that kind of mindset where you take things apart, put them back together again. People as they get older do that with motorcycles and cars and whatever, and, maybe build planes, those kinds of things. So definitely problem solving is one of those key skills that people are going to look for. I think, communication, being a good communicator, being a good active listener is really important for people. And it doesn't necessarily come naturally to some people who are good at technical subjects. Unfortunately, the two sometimes don't go together. So just remind yourself, you may be getting A's in math and physics and chemistry, but think about the fact that you're going to need to collaborate with people, and often things are achieved by teams working together and achieving things rather than by individuals. So that's a really important aspect. And I think there's as much as intelligence is important, emotional intelligence, so-called, is important. So being able to put yourself in other people's position, being aware of what's going on in your own head. Why am I feeling this way? What's making me feel like I can't solve this problem? Being aware of what's going on in your own head is really important. And not, it gives you then the confidence to think, well, I may be totally confused now. I may not be able to see the answer now, but I know I can do this because I solved problems last week and the week before. So it helps you sort of take a step back mentally and think, right, let's break this down. How can I deal with this situation? What are the steps towards, trying to solve this problem that at the moment, just seems completely unsolvable to me. So I think, some of those things are really important alongside the sort of academic or, the hard skills, like, some of those are essential. If you're going to design something, you need to be, strong in some of those subjects. But I think those other skills are really important as well. And, when you see somebody who's leading whatever kind of organization who is an engineer, often the reason that they're leading it is not because of their engineering skill. It's because, they're a good communicator, or they're good at motivating their team, or they're good at planning and seeing ahead and understanding the risks and thinking, well, what can we do about these risks? Some of them we can reduce them, make them less likely to happen. Some of them we're just going to have to live with, and being comfortable about that situation and being confident that, you can still make progress through that. So, those are my thoughts on that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good stuff. It's important. Well,
So Shelley and I are going to be naturally curious about this, because when we met you had been working with Virgin Galactic. You had been involved with a lot of the effort that led to a recent launch, last month, and followed by the Blue Origin launch. And so we wanted to know if you had a chance to watch either of those launches, and if you did, do you have any thoughts on that?
I watched them both live. You won't be surprised to hear. I watched the Virgin Galactic launch online with my son, and he'd seen the progress over the years. So it was really, kind of a great thing, for father and son. He's an engineer as well, for us both to sit together and watch that thing unfold on the day. And when you've spent as many years of your working life working on it, you obviously want to see the job finished and see it successful. So it was great to see that. And then, the Blue Origin launch a couple of weeks later, again, I watched that live, and I didn't, I was very familiar with all the steps in the Virgin Galactic. There was nothing in there that surprised me, really. I knew what was going to be happening. Whereas with the Blue Origin launch, I didn't know too much about it. I hadn't seen, inside their vehicle before. I didn't know what the different stages in detail of their mission were going to be. So that was really interesting, to see it, and also to see the way they presented it, because they had a sort of live show to, talk you through it all. And I thought they put that together really well. It came across really well. And I think, if I was a customer who was thinking, should I fly with these people or not? I know that Virgin have been flying pilots for quite a while, but Blue Origin haven't flown anybody, a human, before this mission. And the way they presented it and the fact that people flew on it, I think I would feel a lot more confident than I had, been wondering, coming up to the flight, is this safe or not? So, yeah, it was both of them were great events, and very pleased that they were both successful. And it will be interesting now to see, how they develop. I think the organizations have got different, kind of challenges in front of them. Virgin Galactic, for example, have some customers signed up, and they need to be able to operate much more frequently than they've been doing in their test program. And they've got a couple of other spaceships that are being produced and will come into the fleet at some point, and they may well add another carrier aircraft at some point, because the spacecraft needs a carrier aircraft to lift it into the sky, as part of its flight. And the spacecraft can't fly without that lift into the sky. So they need to think about that. And it will be interesting to see them develop, to see if they can make the business plan they have work. Whereas, with Blue Origin, I think they really need to decide do they want to be in the space tourism business? They haven't approached the task in that way at all. They haven't been taking advanced bookings as they went along, like Virgin Galactic did. They have ambitions to do other things as well. They're designing a much bigger rocket that will go to orbit. They are designing a lunar lander vehicle as well. They want to participate in a lot more things. So are they going to have a unit that is totally focused on flying people on suborbital flights? I think that's not really very clear at the moment, and we'll see as time goes. I think that both of the organizations said they expect to fly a couple of more times during 2021. So again, we'll look for those missions and see how they go as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's definitely an exciting time to be in the industry of space. And certainly that's been reflected on a lot of our interviews over the past year, for sure. So much happening, so much growth and facing challenges and innovating. But our audience loves to hear about it. So thank you for sharing that with us, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. And just wondering, what can our audience do to support you and the folks at Deorbit?
Well, I think, for your audience, particularly the ones who are in the Southwest, I would sort of ask them to support Spaceport America and the Last Cruises Space Festival. Because I think that's the thing that they can have the most direct impact on. The dream of Spaceport America was not only based on Virgin Galactic coming to New Mexico to operate, but it also being a spaceport that would have other tenants as well. And it has this unique position. It's got the altitude, it's got the great weather most of the year round. It has the quiet airspace next to White Sands Missile Range. It has the state having invested in the facility as well. So a lot of elements are there, and just to keep pushing, and I know they have added some tenants, but just to keep pushing and pushing to really try and build that up and build the campus up. And then just the support of the community was really why I got the idea of founding the Last Cruises Space Festival, really to give people in the community access to some of the space organizations that there are in that part of the world, and to give them just some fun and some entertainment as well as some education. And it'd be great if, when we get back to that event being in person, because the last one in person was 2019, and since then it's been virtual. If people come out and support that, I think it would be, really great. And, the people who are involved in that, it gives them an opportunity to see these companies and think, would I like to work for them in the future? What does working for them actually entail? Can I picture myself in that? requirements are there, academically or otherwise, to do these kinds of jobs? What kind of jobs, will be available? And I think, if both of those are developing, then that will be great. And if the audience can support that, that would be fantastic.
Well, thank you for your time today. And
you're very welcome.
We're just so appreciative of your support over the years. And we continue to watch and be fans of the work that you're doing. And sure that one day soon we'll connect up. It really made my heart happy to know that you and your engineer son could sit side by side and watch those live. That must have felt really great. Just because I know that your family has been so supportive of your career, even as you were here in the US and they were, you were literally a continent away. And so I'm so happy that you all can be back together and enjoying kind of the fruit of your labor.
Thank you very much.
Ways. So we continue to benefit from the Las Cruces Space Festival and participate in that. And so agree with you that we will continue. We hope it's in person this coming year so that we can get back down there again. And it's such a great event and so many wonderful things. And you cast such a great vision for that. So thank you for what you've invested here in the Southwest United States. And we look forward to watching what happens in outer space with deorbit.
Me too.
And what I guess the last thing I'd like to ask is, if any of our listeners were interested in asking you a question, getting in contact with you, how could they do that?
So you could send an email to the company. So it's info@deorbit.space, like it sounds, info@DORBIT.space. Or
Great.
Send me a message on LinkedIn, I guess.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
We'll put that email in the show notes.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. And
You're welcome.
we'll let you head to bed because it's kind of late there where you're at. So thanks for staying up late and talking with us today.
You're welcome, as always.
Hey there, this is Shelley, and I am so glad that you have stopped by STEM Southwest. Can I ask a favor? If you've gotten some value out of our episodes, if you are just powered by nerd power and are excited about what we're doing, or if you're new to us and you've got just an interest, subscribe now and help us grow by doing that. Then take a moment and give us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast player, because we could use your support and help. We are trying to raise up an army of STEM Southwest supporters. And then last, think about sharing our podcast with your friends, your families, or even complete STEM strangers, because, it's all about making the world a better place and having more STEM rock stars highlighted and connected. Stop by our website if you're looking for resources, and you're going to find a lot of things that's going to grow over time. So continue to stop on in and join us. Subscribe now and support STEMSW.com.
You've been listening to the STEM Southwest podcast. Nerd on, fellow STEM nerds.